Greetings from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where we're supposed to get a blizzard, but it hasn't started snowing yet. We have a show today, Sunday. We'll see if we get stuck here, and if I might have to have my meeting with you guys from my hot spot in the car in a ditch tomorrow. We'll see what happens. But I'm going to screen share. Let's begin with a little bit of James, and then we'll move on to the gospel. I think this is related to faith and works. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. In other words, in the same way that faith without works is dead, and you can show people your faith through your works, so you can demonstrate your wisdom by your good life and by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. And he then talks about two different kinds of wisdoms. One we would call really wisdom in quotes, or fake wisdom, earthly wisdom. The other, the true wisdom, the wisdom that comes from God. Because as James tells us, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such so-called wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure and peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. True wisdom from God produces good fruit. False wisdom, demonic, earthly wisdom, wisdom of sarx, or the flesh, as St. Paul would call it, that wisdom is sterile, even deliberately so in this day and age. But the mercy from above is all of these things. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. I want to move on to John 2, because I think something that our Lord says relates to this. This ties into both what I said in my email when I quoted from Romans, if I seek to do good, but I actually do evil, it is not I that do it, but sin that is in me that does it. The law is good. I admire the law, but I am double-minded. James talks about being double-minded. And so here he's talking about the false wisdom of this world and this age, and the true wisdom that comes from God. But it's the true wisdom that motivates the good works. Because if you have envy or selfish ambition, you are taking pride in what you do. And what I wanted to talk about, and maybe we'll get to this in class, I have students who don't do their work. And what will often happen is they will indignantly say, well, I meant to, as if that's an excuse, as if intention really counts for anything. But intention does. I mean, it's the thought that counts, we hear when we get a bad gift for Christmas. And we realize it's the thought behind the gift, not whether or not the gift really is a good gift. So this is also the split between intention and act, which Hamlet is about. But neither by themselves is enough. The intention alone won't do you any good. And if you brag about your intention, as some of my students do, well, I meant to do my homework. It's not my fault that I forgot the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, when I was on my 10-day trip, that I left the book at home and that I could have bought it at any bookstore or could have downloaded it on my phone. It's not my fault that I forgot. I meant to remember. On the other hand, if we focus just on the work and on the end product, we can take pride in the work. And we can say, look at all these novenas I've been praying. Look at how I've given my life up. I'm a priest. I don't have a family. I don't have a wife. Look at everything I've given up. That sort of wisdom is earthly, demonic, from below. It's a wisdom, and I'll go back to the screen share, as St. James tells us, it's a wisdom that harbors bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart. In other words, if there's pride involved, and if you're putting number one first, it is a false wisdom, whether it regards your intention, i.e., your faith, or your deeds, i.e., your works. In either case, if you're putting number one first, it's false wisdom, and it's the wrong side of the double-minded split that St. Paul complains of. But let's see if I can get to something else. But of course, as I say, sometimes I can't click on these tabs because it doesn't let me, because it puts this thing in the way. And it really is blocking me at this point. I have to stop share. I have to go here. I have to click on the tab. And then I have to go back to share. Isn't that wonderful? Who designed this? Clearly, this is not wisdom from above that designed this. One of the interesting things that's going on in chapter 7 of John is, I think this ties into what we're saying. Jesus answered, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me." If this were his own teaching, his own wisdom, it would be the wisdom of this earth, the wisdom from below. He is teaching the wisdom from above. Jesus empties himself and takes the form of a slave. He passes on the wisdom of the Father. And insofar as he does that, which he does perfectly, he models for us the perfect disciple and, in fact, the perfect rabbi, the perfect teacher. If I am a good teacher, I am a good teacher only insofar as I teach a teaching that is not my own, and insofar as I teach what comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. This is really interesting. You can't judge the authority of Christ as Messiah unless and until you try to do the will of God. That puts you in good faith. Even if you fail to do the will of God, if you try in good faith, faith leads to faith. And by opening yourself up to the wisdom from above, then you can recognize that Christ is the Messiah and he is teaching the wisdom that comes from above. And you can discern whether his teaching comes from above or he speaks on his own. He is saying, in a sense, put me to the test, but you cannot put me to the test unless you are trying to do God's will. If you try to test Jesus the way Satan tests him, through a kind of cynical temptation, you will not be able to discern whether he is the Messiah and his teaching comes from above. You see this in life all the time. People only understand and only achieve wisdom, even secular wisdom, even wisdom in school, if they are approaching it in good faith. Faith leads to faith, as St. Paul tells us. We'll read that in 1 Corinthians here soon. And by opening yourself up to doing the will of God, then you can perceive others who are also operant in the will of God. And you begin to recognize what the church is, like this class. He continues, whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory, vainglory. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. If you do what I do, if you pass on the wisdom that is from above, then you are a man of truth, and you are like me. And then there is nothing false about you. You are not a liar or the son of a liar, as Satan is. But again, it's the wisdom from above and the wisdom below. The key to the wisdom from above is serving that which is objectively beyond you. But if you say we make our own meaning, as John did, whoever that commenter was on Rod Dreher's blog, then you are not seeking the wisdom from above, or you're really confused. Because once you say there is meaning and there is reality and it is beyond me and it is my job to discern it and serve it, then good things can happen and your wisdom will be fruitful and peaceful and all those other things that James lists, and not envious and filled with strife and ultimately sterile and self-serving. And remember that this all comes up because Jesus has healed on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees are looking at works and not at the faith behind the works. Remember, they both go together. And they say, if you are doing anything on the Sabbath, you are violating the law of Moses. And then Jesus gives an elaborate pun, which doesn't come out in this translation. In this translation, he talks about how if the 8th day of a child's life is the Sabbath, the Jews were allowed to circumcise that boy on the Sabbath because circumcision trumped the obeyance of the Sabbath. Well, he's saying if circumcision does, healing would. And here the translation is, now if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Here's your interlinear, the word that is translated there in the New International Version. And it's, of course, it takes me too far back. The word that is translated there as healing is the Greek word, is it hukios or something like that? Oh, hygie, where we get hygiene from. But this word, when you click on it, why are you mad that I made someone whole, healthy, sound on the Sabbath? Sound, whole, healthy, hugies. Hugies is the root word in Greek. So the pun is, if you can make a man less than whole on the Sabbath with a little scissors and a snip, 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 why cannot I not make a man fully whole on the Sabbath? Because Jesus is bold enough to pun. He is bold enough to take the great sacrament of circumcision, which for us becomes baptism, and joke about it in a profound way that communicates more than a mere joke. Well, anyway, this is the union of faith and works. The letter of the law, it is the spirit that brings life. The letter kills, as St. Paul tells us. He's being hyperbolic. But if you follow only the letter of the law and say, I dare not heal a man on the Sabbath, you are disobeying the spirit of the law, because even circumcision, though it conveys a physical wound, brings the Jews spiritual healing, or at least the beginning of spiritual healing. And Jesus can talk about this because he understands, being God, the relationship between faith and works, between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, between the wisdom from above and the wisdom from below. Okay, more tomorrow, perhaps from a ditch, snowbound in the side of the road. Pray for me if you're seeing this in time that we get home safely.